Well, I want to thank you all for coming back so promptly. We're going to have our period of questions and answers. Many of you have submitted questions over the last couple of days, so we're going to try and get to as many of those as we can. Obviously, we will not be able to get to all of them, so just bear with us. Before we go into the question and answers, I think I just wanted to share with you something I'm sure that you would be interested in. Just last night, when we had our presentation about the future of the Adyar estate, Michiel, in his zestful enthusiasm to collect money for the project, talked about if the phone rings and what will be charged. So he charged me. I paid my $1,000. But many of you, just out of the just free-hearted generosity of your own, tracked down the people who had the different pitchers, and those pitchers came back up here filled to the brim. If anybody else had wanted to donate, we wouldn't have been able to fit it into the pitcher. So I want to thank you for that, and also tell you the result of it. It was a total of 68,000 rupees. 70,000 rupees, which does not include the most generous $500 donation from the gentleman there. So it's over 1 lakh last night. So thanks to all of you. And I know if I were to ask you how it felt to give in that way, I'm certain that there's a certain joy that comes in giving, but it was very well expressed last night. Also, I want to let you know that since last night as well, the Italian section of the Theosophical Society has also made a donation toward our renovation project, a donation of 20,000 euros. So, owing to all of you, I think we're going to be doing okay. As time goes on, you're going to see the things that last night were talk. So, thank you. We'll continue as we go along, but I just wanted to let you know that news, because quite honestly, it's wonderful news. All right, so now we'll have some questions and answers. We just introduced Dr. Eugene Jennings and Herman Vermeulen. Linda Oliveira has also been introduced, so I will skip that and just go straight to the questions. So we have a number of questions. We'll try and work them around the group. One question: what are the biggest challenges for the Theosophical Societies and for individual Theosophists if we want to be increasingly relevant to the world? Or on which challenges should we focus our energy, attention, and resources? So, should I look left? Well, let's start over here.
Okay. I think the biggest challenge we have, and that we experience in the Netherlands as well, but I have seen it in other countries also, is we are not very good in transmitting the knowledge of Theosophy to the common people. So the translation we have to make from understanding the teachings to practical examples and show the people what it means in daily life and which answers it gives, I think that is something that we have to train on. And so I found that a big challenge. I've seen very good theosophical speakers, and if fresh people are coming in, they have no clue what is going on. So I think that is really the challenge.
There seems to be an assumption. This microphone is off, I think. Can you hear? Yes. There seems to be an assumption that we are not relevant to the world, any of the Theosophical Societies, or perhaps that Theosophy, which we are in the process of conveying, is not relevant to the world. I think that we are always relevant to the world. but there may be perceptions by some that we are making ourselves irrelevant in certain ways. I think it is very important that we employ modern technology and utilize it in the best way that we can, so that whatever we have to say is made as widely available as possible. That is one thing. To pick up on what Mr. Vermeulen has said, or Vermeulen, sorry, pardon?
Just Herman.
Just Herman. What Herman has just said, I think there is a practical element to theosophy which needs to be brought out. We have a very fine collection of teachings. Technical theosophy, as it were, was referred to in the first session this morning also. But unless we can show ways in which it can be practically applied, then some individuals, and particularly newcomers, may not consider that theosophy is practically or is relevant in their lives. Unless something speaks to people's lives, then it may just be considered as irrelevant. And lastly, to help convey this sense of importance of theosophy in all its manifestations and what it has to offer, inspiration needs to be provided. If people feel inspired by perhaps some aspect of the teachings, or by the possibility that those teachings are in fact something which can be integrated and used in their lives, then something is enkindled. Some spark can be fanned into flame, and all sorts of things are possible.
One of the things that was said by HPB, and I believe it was in the Key to Theosophy, which I think applies to this idea of relevance. The Theosophical Society is said to exist in order to make known that such a thing as theosophy exists. So, the absence of an awareness of its existence is the problem, in a way, that the Theosophical was born to speak to. Many ways, of course, we are involved in doing that. As Theosophists, we are definitely people of the book. We believe in study and the potential effects that that can engender. But using myself as an example, and probably you as well, the most potent communicator of theosophy, at least for me, has been through the example and the lives of those who I have had the good fortune to encounter, who actually have embodied these things in their way of living, in the manner in which they develop relationships with others. I think it was Albert Schweitzer who said that example, when asked if example is a good way to teach, his response was that example is in fact the only way that we can teach. So to me, the importance, we will always maintain programs. We will always maintain outreaches of various sorts. But unless those things are actually embodied by people in whom some aspect of this has come to life, and that it finds its way out to express itself to others, then there'll be hollow programs, and it will in fact be irrelevant. The relevance comes when it can be demonstrated in the lives of you and of me, that there is something of value here. So for me, that puts a great burden, not on development of structures, but on the cultivation and the nourishment of this presence that I find within myself, that you find within yourselves. That's where it begins. That's where it grows from, and that will be the relevance of theosophy now. It's the reason we're all here and into the future.
I would just agree with everything that was said, but because there's a part of me that's in that medical field, I would say that we have to know our audience and know what they need, and also, unfortunately, know what they want. What they want is not always what they need, but if they don't recognize that they need it, we first have to address the wants to show them that they need it. Theosophy per se is timeless. It will always be relevant. That is not an issue. The issue in terms of its relevance is more a reflection of the individuals expressing theosophy than it is theosophy. Madame Blavatsky has given us a universal language that alters the very structure of our mind, that allows us to talk with any individual at any time on any level. So the burden of responsibility is on the theosophist in regards to understanding the needs and the wants of the people, and then modifying not the message but the expression of the message to deal with the issues at hand. And without using any theosophical terminology, once we do that, individuals perk up and they wonder, where did this come from? And at that point, if you wish, you can introduce gradually ideas, because no one wants to feel as though they're being converted. But as the teachers and the teaching says, this is just a natural process of unfolding. So that if we know our audience, we understand their needs, we understand their wants, because although there may be no value per se in the world for us, and I say that with Patanjali in mind, because he said at a certain point, even the world becomes an obstacle to the yogi who is truly searching out the way. But because the world has value for everyone else, we must understand that value, understand those needs, and then adapt the expression of the teaching, not the heart of the teaching, but the expression of the teaching simply to fit the needs, the wants, and the levels of understanding of the individuals that are involved.
Eugene? The theosophical viewpoint indicating that compassion is the receiving of vibrations from the spiritual intuition or the Buddhic level when the astral has settled into calmness through the central part of the heart chakra. This has not been considered at all in the deliberations of this convention. Will it be possible for any of the people on stage here to throw some light on that aspect of the subject? So it's a question that I think is supremely suited to Gene.
Give us a minute.
Okay, can I see that, please? All righty, I thought I could sit back and relax and let everyone else do that.
Herman said I must give Gene a time limit.
Yeah, please do. I do not feel offended when you do that, because I need one. I need a leash. But in this question, there are several issues that deal with several different levels of being and different ideas. Madame Blavatsky talks about the idea of the chakras, of Kundalini, of the winds and the drops, as the Tibetans would say, from the psychophysiological perspective as it relates to occultism, which is still a lower aspect, does not necessarily have anything to do with the real awakening of Buddhimanas. Because the awakening of and to Buddhimanas is beyond, as indicated here, the astral. and is even beyond, if we are understanding things from a certain perspective, the level of the spiritual ego. And I know that sounds really horrendous, but those are the levels that we have been given in regards to our unfolding to understand, to experience from the practice side, so that we are not lost on the way. The image of the watcher in the secret doctrine is more than an image, in that it is a reality simply because there are many systems dealing with the chakras. There are many systems dealing with the awakening of Kundalini. There are many people looking for the physiological rise and going out through the head chakra. But what does that get us? Unless we understand how those relate to the planes, how they relate to the states of consciousness, how they relate to the rounds and the races, and how all of that relates to the monad in all of its aspects. And before I turn this over, I will just try to remember, in 5 years of theosophy, T. Saburo wrote an article. And it was a little dialogue going on between he and HPB in regards to certain truths and, wisdom, religion, etc. And he said, from the Brahmin tradition, if we are going to talk about the esoteric tradition or the wisdom religion, we have to understand it, at least as they do, from the point of view of the macrocosm, its relationship with the microcosm, its relationship with the system of true yoke, that again embraces everything that was written and not written in the secret doctrine in terms of one's unfoldment. It has to do with Hatha Yoga, but not from the perspective of pranayama and simply breathing exercises to change physiological currents, because that goes with the body. It has to do with, and I can't always pronounce these terms, Kula Agamas, Shiva Agamas, those sacred teachings that have to do with that aspect of our nature, and Sakti Agamas. And it has to do with Shri Chakra. In other words, that aspect of the physiological that has to do with the awakening of the chakras. And then it has to do with embracing the Vedas. So, it's not so much of one piece here and one piece there and one piece here. But first, it is important to understand all of the pieces in the puzzle, to put them together, and then living or dying to make that vow that as we serve in the world, our life is not ours. We have given it over to that tradition. And while we live, we practice. And then those things, such as chakras, if that's what you're interested in, become very apparent. The energies, the alphabet, as the Shivas say, the very vowels that are inherent within the fabric of the Absolute become visible. That's amazing. So, if we live the life that we have been given as it relates to the teachings, things of this nature become secondhand and also not very important, because they are not as important as the cause for which theosophy exists. Thank you.
Just to pick up a little bit on the physiological aspect that Gene touched on, there's an organization, they're situated in the United States, in California, called Heart Math Institute, like heart mathematics. I'd encourage you to look it up, Heart Math. They've done some very, very interesting experimentation related to the heart. I'll share one experiment with you. The idea basically that they take is that the heart is very overlooked in terms of its role in the consciousness of the human being and of the world. Particular experiment was this, and I'll leave you to form your own conclusions. It was, they had a screen on which they would show pictures. and they had someone who was watching the screen who would be wired up to different things to show his brain's reaction electrically and the heart's reaction, so that they could see how they were responding to the images that came up on the screen. They chose two types of images to show on the screen. One was images of, beautiful nature scenes and flowers and puppies and cuddly kittens, things like that. Things that would cause you to feel quite warmly. The other was images of war, automobile accidents. They tried to push it the limit about as far as they could in good taste to those sorts of images that would make one naturally recoil, naturally feel uncomfortable. And then they watched to see the response of the brain and the response of the heart. What was done was the image would be shown, there would be a 10-second break between each image before the next one came up, and they were all generated randomly. So there was no possibility to predict which type of image would be coming up next. So what happened, which I found quite interesting, was this. When the image would appear on the screen, they checked with the brain's response, and within microseconds of the time that the image appeared, you would see the response of the brain. Either the type of response you would expect for a very violent picture or the more opening, natural sort of picture. So a couple of milliseconds after the image was shown. In monitoring the heart, what they found was this, and this is the part that I think speaks to something. That before the image appeared on the screen, the heart's electrical response began. Prior to any visual image, the heart was able to anticipate, was able to know what was coming. So to me it's something that confirms this idea that is spoken of in the theosophical writings, that the heart is the spiritual organ in the human being, the spiritual center. So it's something that we should pay some attention to. This question, I believe, calls attention to that fact. I just offer that just for something for you to think about and see how it might relate.
May I make a comment?
Yes, if you can.
The question began with the words, the theosophical view, correct?
Something like that.
Yes, the theosophical view of compassion. One of the great teachers for many people around the world was Joy Mills. And one can't help but bring her to mind from time to time during this convention after her very recent passing. She was a wonderful teacher. One of the things which she did was she broke down the meaning of the word theosophy and compared it from memory with Brahma Vidya. When she went back to the source of both words, she said it comes down to something like this, a way of seeing which is always expanding, something to that effect. And therefore, in a sense, to try to come up with certain set definitions of, for example, the theosophical view about certain things is to limit ourselves. The technical aspects of the teachings, I think, are really important to become acquainted with. That is extremely important. But equally important, I think, if we are searching for truth, is to be able to consider different ways of looking at truth. I often use the example of a circle with a line around the edges of it. Imagine for a moment that truth is in the middle of that circle. If we try to see truth and the circle is completely tightly bound up, we cannot see what is in the middle of the circle. But if we remove just a little bit of the circumference and peer through that, we may begin to see a little bit of truth. If we move around the circumference and remove a little more of that circumference and look towards the center of the circle, we can see a little more of truth. And so it goes on until ultimately the circle completely disappears and there is a totality which is also experience. So perhaps if we can bring this kind of attitude to considering theosophical teachings, then our minds may grow and expand in new ways that we had not imagined before. And perhaps although we have spoken about compassion during this convention in many different ways, it is something which is far greater, far vaster than our descriptions as well.
I think for us it is important to realize that if you do this type of studies and investigations, that you should realize that truth is by definition a personal thing. There is not something what can be handed over from one to the other. We build our own truths, and that is depending on the way how we do investigations. If we just accept things, it is a belief. If we get good examples from theosophy and we are willing to study them and search in daily life, if we are able to experience this teaching, and at the same moment you experience that teaching, then you can say, yes, I have the evidence for myself now, and it becomes now a part of my truth. So that means that it is dynamic and it is very individual. And what Tim just told from HeartMath, they give a lot of very nice and very strong examples how it works. So what we learn in theosophy is that it is not the heart, the physical heart, what you should train. It is the spiritual heart what you should train. And if you train it in the right way, the physical heart will, let's say, develop in the same line with it. It is type of sensor, you can say. But I think the clue of what we are and what we can be is just in the spiritual part what should be trained and changed accordingly to our limitations.
Thank you, Herman. This question asks about the role of the presenter or the speaker in speaking from the stage or in speaking about giving theosophical presentations. The premise is that every thought from the speaker, when it goes out, is magnified by each member of the audience. This gives great power to casual negative statements. It also gives great power to positive sorts of statements. So what would you see as the role of the person who is presenting on theosophy? Maybe this. Go ahead, Herman. Take it.
I think this is a very important question. If you realize the following thing, you know maybe that I have a technical background, and in the physical world there are a number of physical laws, special in the electronic field, that say something that the characteristic of the source should be in line with the characteristics of the receiver. And in that moment, I see Jacques already smiling, on that moment you have a good transmission. So that means for us, if we are not able to bring it from the right characteristics, and if we have fresh people coming in, and we speak fully, how do you say that, from according to the Theosophical dictionary, then there is a little of transmission of ideas. If we are able to switch ourselves and speak the language of the fresh people coming in, then the transmission of information is much bigger. So that means the following to me. If you are a speaker and your audience is in harmony, let's call it in harmony, is in harmony with you, yes, then you can have a huge magnification. If the audience is not in harmony with you, the transmission of that energy and the magnification is much little. So speaking for us within theosophical groups is much easier than speaking out in, let's say, unknown group from different characteristics. And then the magnification is much more difficult, and then we have to switch ourselves to a different mode of speaking so that we have a better transmission of ideas.
It is very easy for people to remember what a speaker has said in different ways. Sometimes things are repeated afterwards which are not quite accurate, and this is very common. I think this very fact underscores the importance for the speaker to have the greatest clarity possible. Clarity in terms of what the speaker wants to share with an audience, and clarity in the mode of speaking itself also. When there is clarity, there is less room for misunderstandings. This may be somewhat of a learned art. For example, if there is a very great deal of information being imparted, it may be a little confusing. So, being a speaker has certain responsibilities, and certainly within the context of the Theosophical tradition also, there is implied a clarity about what one is presenting to. But one other thing too, if there is authenticity that comes from the speaker, a genuine interest, a genuine sense of that the speaker is endeavouring to live aspects of what he or she is speaking about, then I think that whatever is being said will have a greater integrity to it as well, and hopefully be understood by an audience in that way also.
Yeah, a couple of things. Actually, the communication process is two-way, of course. There is the one who speaks, and there are those who hear and magnify. And there are responsibilities that lie on each side of that equation. I can say that probably the best talk that I ever attended, I don't remember anything whatsoever about what was said. The person's speaking quality was far below standard of what you would want to put here. But the reason, what made it the best talk was that it was a young fellow who had been asked to speak at a relatively large gathering. It was 50, 60 people who were there. And when he got up to speak, quickly he lost track of his subject, and he just kept he was suffering, just really suffering in front of everyone who was there. And it was, at first, it was an uncomfortable feeling to see how he struggled, to see how he suffered, to see as the sweat pooled on his forehead and dripped down. And it was clear at a certain point that he was not going to regain his composure. And that's when this became the best talk that I had ever attended. Because almost as if it was one person, the group of people who were sitting there listening rose up in a way to comfort him, to let him know that everything is all right, that the words that you're struggling to say are not the important feature here, but you are. It was beautiful. So that was the most in tune sort of audience that you could ask for. That was a theosophical response. No information was passed at that particular talk. No one learned anything new about the different planes of nature. But they were able to call upon something that's within them and bring it to the fore. So to me, this speaks to the dual responsibility. From the other side, obviously, you would hope that someone who takes it upon themselves to present is there more than just to transfer information. That's one function. But if this theosophy is going to be something that's going to have an impact in people's lives, it has to, at some point, come from a realm of experience, not just ideas. And so every single person, whether they are the head of a section or whether they are just the member setting up the chairs, which often are, the two are the same, I should say. But every single person has some genuine experience of a spiritual nature that can bring these teachings to life. And then it becomes more than words. It becomes more than a repetition of someone else's fine idea. And so these two things, I think, have to go hand in hand. But we have to take our responsibility when we're sitting there listening. That if we find ourselves critical of the way or the particular ideas someone is expressing, we find a way to subdue that sort of criticism. We see, but we don't break things apart. We have a responsibility and we have a power. And those two have to go together.
Thank you for all of those statements. So what else can I say? I would just echo again what has been said and just say it in a different way, and that is, the teachers have always said simply, and I'm going to change it a tad, live the life to be the teaching. We have to get to a point, and again, it's not something that we have to cognitively do, but we have to get to a point where we can believe that we are the ocean of theosophy that we are sharing. And then that we are, as usual, sharing it simply to ourselves, because there is no difference, there is no distinction in actuality. And yet, as any speaker probably knows, there is, in time and space, a requirement to know the audience, to feel the audience, to see the expressions that silently speak about the internal response, and to respond to them. And so, from a very, very, very personal perspective, when I am representing theosophy, and it's different in different arenas. So if I'm at what they call a professional conference and I have to talk on ideas that are related to theosophy without saying theosophy, I still have to know the audience and know where they're at in order to use the language. And so that is a responsibility I believe that we as speakers always have. The other part of that is a part of communication. Because we all know that when we study theosophy, as and I'll switch gears a little bit here, Patanjali says, the word is not the object, and the object is not the intellectual understanding. And so when we speak, we have to ask ourselves on what level we are speaking. And then that word feel comes in again. And so the speaker, in a sense, is feeling the audience, and from my own personal perspective, challenging not only the audience, but self. And the challenge is, how do we disturb? Not make comfortable. How do we disturb? But the disturbance is a pleasant disturbance because it is about stretching and reaching. How do we inspire the audience to recognize that there is something here that we can express that is worth going after, because even though we can't see it, we can't smell it, we can't taste it, it's more real than anything that we have ever encountered. So as a speaker, the challenge to this organism, if we will, is to communicate in a way that disturbs, that awakens, that inspires, and that instills that curiosity that when we're gone, the life inside, the seed that has been planted, continues to move an individual forward to seek out those answers for themselves.
A couple of questions that relate to theosophy, perhaps as applied to political things in the world. There's the idea that when terrorists strike at any place and kill numerous people, many countries react violently, also killing innocent people. People and some terrorists are killed. When nature kills, what reaction follows? Virtually nothing. So the question, I guess, boils down to what is needed on a practical level to bring about a shift in political consciousness with an awareness of universal responsibility. Big question, big question. Do we have a big answerer? Oh, Herman.
Short answer. We have to change our thinking, because if we realize, and we have, of course, unfortunately, an example in Europe now, you cannot expect that if you push someone in the world and you create a harsh situation, that it will not reflect to other places. So we should realize that our, let's say, way of thinking, our karmic behavior, is creating all the negative waves we get over us or to us. So I think what we have to do also on political level is to think much more in the sense of oneness. We don't need borders. We don't need thousands and thousands of miles of walls between countries and so on. We need more open communications. If everywhere on the world is peace, then everybody is happy to stay in his home country and is not stretched to run around to different places. But I'm not so optimistic. If I look to the current world situation, especially from a political point of view, I think we have quite to do a real hard job as theosophists, to make aware to them that changing of the way of thinking and becoming more in the line of an active brotherhood is just a solution for it.
I suppose there are a few different ways of approaching the political situation in the world in general and specific political problems as well. One can engage individually with governments in one's country or whatever, causes that seem to be important in terms of potential political solutions, So each and every one of us could do that as we so wish. We may choose to be part of movements which do engage politically and bring our own views to bear there. Thinking, for example, of the Theosophical Society with the headquarters here at Adyar. Perhaps we could become a model organisation, an organisation in which politics is really kept to a minimum, so that we function together consciously as harmoniously as possible. Imagine if the Theosophical Society could become a model society, an example of how certain processes can be carried on in a spirit of great cooperation, brotherhood and sisterhood. That would be quite a wonderful thing. And perhaps the reputation of such a society could filter out in different ways as well. So there are different ways we can look at that. But politics, almost by definition, involve divisiveness. So whatever we can do as individuals to live in a way which causes the minimum possible division, which identifies that the other is also ourselves, the more we can do to live in that way, the more we can do to affect the world and eventually the broader political activities as well. Because living life in a way which is good, a way which is true and meaningful, has to become contagious. Others notice how other people live. And if somebody lives in a way which seems to be very genuine, very sincere, and a way in which harmony is spread, then that has to be a good thing and can only help to affect the world in a positive way.
Okay. Actually, as that question was asked, I was thinking about the brief intro to ITC that Herman gave, and the comment that I made to him afterwards, and I said, gosh, if the world could do what we're trying to do amongst ourselves in terms of the respect, the open communication, the ability to disagree, but to see what needs to be done and work in harmony with that end, then we would all be okay. So in one respect, that is a model if we can move beyond our personalities. But since we can't, then at least in my mind, there is the statement made by the teachers in the Mahatma letters that had to do with understanding certain things. And the important point was that the light within the skandhas, no matter what level, no matter where at, no matter what formation, is not that appearance. But because the nature of, if we use the terminology of the Gita, the nature of the gunas is understandable, and how they combine to generate principles of being. If we understand their operation, and we acknowledge that the light is typically occluded by the very gunas and skandhas, then we first start by understanding how they are acting. This is not a judgment on the soul, but an awareness of the nature of the matter that is the very fabric of the life that we live. Most individuals, unfortunately, are driven by their passions, driven by their urges, driven by their wishes and desires. And that's okay. And if we understand the way the gunas are working within that field of activity, we can understand the continuum. And it's not so much about predicting the future, but it's about seeing the natural outcome of interactions amongst them. If we can achieve that kind of an understanding, and I know it sounds far-fetched, but it's not so far-fetched, because they do it in regards to certain aspects of psychology, psychiatry, medicine itself. We understand how the bacteria work, we know their lifespans, we know where to interject with the antibiotics to alter that activity. If we understand how the gunas themselves are working in the world scenario, we can at least understand where it's going. And then as the teachers themselves, understanding the cycle within which those scenarios are unfolding, we can begin to understand the best points at not interfering, but injecting a current of change. As Herman said, clearly beginning with what we think, but also again, back to these two, what we need and what we want, because most folks respond politically even from what they want, as opposed to what's needed for the benefit and the harmony of the people. But if we're understanding this interplay of gunas, then it's not surprising what the outcome is. The only question is, if the outcome is relatively speaking because of the dynamics of the karmic flow, if the outcome, relatively speaking, is inevitable, at what points in that flow can we interject to change the current in order to modify to some degree the outcome?
There's a familiar quote from Albert Einstein, who said that no problem can be solved on the level at which it was created. So when we speak about a political approach to the certain problems in the world, it gives a clear indication that at the level at which these problems are created, we should not be seeking at that level for practical solutions. Those solutions have been tried and are continually retried. Where there is violence in the world, trying to solve the problem at its own level, the solution has been and continues to be that we apply greater violence. So if there's an uprising, the way it's solved is by applying yet greater violence, and it dies down. Does it work? The fact that there are in excess of 60 wars going on in the world today in different places would tend to indicate that it does not. So there is and there must be some different level at which these things can be approached. This is the whole point of not only of theosophy, but of the practice involved around it. We've heard some things about the way in which genuine sort of practice affects the brain, just the physiology, just the way that information and energies flow through the physical body is affected by the way in which we turn the mind. So it's not a matter of something that's airy-fairy or removed from the world of the real. The thoughts that we allow ourselves to think, the states of being that we cultivate in our quiet moments, alter our physical being and project beyond the boundaries of our skin and affect others. There is no change that has ever taken place that has not been the result of a small group of people. We think too big sometimes, and we think ourselves too small. No change that has come into being has always been precipitated by a small group who were able to think in unison, who were able to project a current that attracted a greater current to affect the circumstances and the happenings in the world. This is what we try to do in our own lives, in our lodge workings. And the person who asked the question asked for a practical approach. To me, there's nothing more practical than this. The fact that you don't touch it, you're never going to touch a thought. Makes it no less real. So, practically speaking, we can change the nature and the quality of the thoughts and emotions which we allow to flow through us and out into the world. And that's the job before us. Let me ask this. We have time for about one half of one more question. Is there any question that anyone on the panel would like to ask or that they feel needs to be spoken to? I have a stack of other questions, if not. Why now?
You don't want to do that.
Herman, anything comes to mind?
I'm just for the answers.
All right. Well, we'll go from the stack. Let's see. We'll ask a big question. Why are we compassionate? And why are we compassionate? Let's just leave it that way. Why are we compassionate? So you hear the answer from the voice of the silence. Anyone want to answer, or will we leave it with the silence?
What I like, the question implies already then someone is already compassionated. And I think that also for me defined the fact that somehow that person experiences the oneness, the sense of oneness, and that he finds it quite logic to react from that point of view. So in principle, I think it is for me a quite good statement. But in general, I think, why are we compassionate? We can say that in one or another way, everybody's experience in small, in big, in all different situations, that there is a totality that we have to address and where we're part of. Everybody can realize every day on so simple levels that we're part of a much bigger unit, and that we have our share in that I think it is quite normal, neutral, that we do that. And we all have in our thinking all the different elements of thinking, the Buddhic, the Atmic, and the Manasic in it. So it is not a real big effort what you have to do to realize that we have in one way or the other a sense of oneness.
It's not required.
I have nothing to add to what Herman has said.
You going to speak to me? How much time do I have? 30 seconds. I would just, if we think back to what the teachings say again, and I'm sorry for using that expression over and over, but about the monad as the imperishable portion of our being, and the initial vibration that awakens in it, which subsequently gives rise to the force that we call law or karma. That initial vibration is the same in everyone. And so obviously we become obscured by the very bodies that we use, but we are compassionate because compassion is the very essence of what we are.
And I think that speaks to it all. I would only say the question, why are we compassionate, asks The better question would be, I think, why are we not compassionate? Why are we compassionate is a very similar question to why do we breathe? Why is there sunlight? Why, the whys that go on and on and on that are ultimately unanswerable. Why are we not compassionate, I think, is a question that we need to take into our own heart and then deal with those. That will bring to an end this wonderful question and answer session. I'm just really quite energized, having sat in the middle of these folks. And I think they have helped to energize additional things, because actually I got a note during the course of our panel that an email came in during the course of this conversation saying that another 100,000 rupees is being donated for the renovation project. So at this point, between last night and today, we're somewhere in the area of 1,600,000 rupees. Let's keep talking.